Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We are so excited to have you all here. We are going to be talking about redefining the standard for global talent and insights. Um, One big thing we're going to be showing you today is a preview of our brand new global talent analyst software. But more importantly, I am so excited for a powerhouse team of participants on today's call and get to glean from all of their insights from all the different perspectives. It's so unique to have a diverse group on this call with different thought leaders from broad industry, like Josh Bersin, and with our in-house economist extraordinaire, Ron Hetrick. And then we have two wonderful customers and friends on the call with Christine from Google and Meta from NVIDIA. So I would love to just jump right in. We got a lot of content to cover, but we're so excited to have you here. And I'm excited for getting through what we're going to be talking about with each of the different perspectives and tying this all together of really just helping your global strategy as you are looking to all the different areas to improve your current processes. So, like I said, Ron Hetrick, our senior global economist here at Lightcast. You've all probably heard him speak various times, and he is a wonderful active participant on LinkedIn and giving us wonderful daily insights. Josh doesn't need any introduction. He is the premier. I always call him the godfather of HR. I don't know if he likes that title or not, but that's what we love to affectionately call him behind the scenes. But he's been a great partner of ours for a long time, and super excited for his high level insights of where he predicts 24 going, and being able to interject on some of these global strategy conversations as well. And as I mentioned, Christine from Google, the talent intelligence lead, we are so happy to be working with them and their team, and she's going to give us some deep insights into some of the ways that they're thinking about the global recruiting and analyzing different markets. And she will be joined with Brandon in that section to bring in some insights from the product that he's been working on a very long time, and so excited to be able to launch that. So Brandon Crouch, our global business line manager, is here as well. And then Meta from NVIDIA, she has been a longtime customer, and we are so excited to have her bring her insights, being the new global talent intelligence and attraction manager at NVIDIA. So I won't waste any more time. We're going to jump right in. Josh, I'll pass it over to you. Thanks so much for being here, y'all.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sort of thrilled to be on a panel like this too with such amazing people. Let me take just a couple of minutes and set the stage, and then I'll turn it over to Ron. We are in a, by the way, I think it's really interesting that the two clients we have on this video are called talent intelligence experts. Talent intelligence is a concept that I think all of you are going to have to figure out how to deal with, because we're entering a period of time, maybe for many decades, when we're going to have a lot of labor shortages in many pockets of the workforce. You can see the data on demographics. Last week, there was an interesting article that even China, which is expected to be, the economic powerhouse, is going to shrink to maybe half the size that it is today from its labor force. So this idea of hiring all the time randomly won't work. The second, of course, is that companies are transforming themselves faster than ever. 60% of the organizations surveyed by PwC CEOs stated that they believe that in 10 years, their organization as it exists today will be gone. It will be completely different. And I think you all know what that means. Mergers, acquisitions, new products, new services, new geographies. I don't have to talk about AI. We all know what the impact of AI is going to be. It's going to be transformational and bringing data together in a much more rapid form than ever before. We won't have to wait 3 years for the IT department to build some big data system for you to get the information you need. And that's obviously what Lightcast does. And then the other one, of course, is that employees are not sitting back waiting for you to do something. They are taking action. In fact, we just published a big study on what we call employee activation. Because of the labor market, because of the stresses of the pandemic, because of the demographics, because the baby boomers are retiring, many employees are saying, I don't really want to do it your way. I want you to do it my way. And that's a very big stress, of course, on organizations and HR, and it affects your planning and your strategy on where you source people, how you source people, and so forth. I'm going to stop there. This particular report is available to you on our website if you'd like to read it, and it goes through all these topics. But let me just turn it over to you, I guess, to Ron, right, and let you guys continue because there's so many interesting things to talk about today.
All right. Thank you, Josh. And hopefully everybody is doing well on this lovely Friday. So, if anybody has seen me speak or you know me, sometimes I'm kind of like the prophet of doom, and that's not really intentional. But I get to speak always about a pretty tough subject, something that I a couple of years ago was lead author of something called Demographic Drought, where we started noticing that dynamics were really changing, especially. We started looking at them in the U.S., but we could start to see that these things were happening in every developed nation around the world, and what is happening in a very profound way and happening very, very quickly and usually much faster than the models predicted. Populations are aging, much thinner populations coming up, when we talk about just not having children for a couple decades. So what we have is almost this universal global tightening of labor pools. And as that's happening, you also have just the nature of work, the sophistication of it getting more complex. We love to throw around words like AI, and AI is going to do this and AI is going to do that. Well, that means in order for AI to do all of those things, then you're going to really need a lot of people who know how to work with AI, or a lot of people who can develop AI in order to let it reach its full potential. Certainly, people on the other side who are the users of this are also going to need this. Gone are the days where we used to offshore things like a call center or our manufacturing plants, and it was just all what we considered kind of this lower skilled work. Increasingly, you're going to be looking to see how can I get work done, but I need a labor force that is capable of doing the work that I want to send outside of my country. And so when you get to that last part, you start to go, well, I'm going to need to go do this. I'm going to have to go this here. And in the past, I think we saw it as, well, that's an endless supply of people. You can take a dart, throw it, hit any country in the world, and you're going to throw these people there. But that is no longer true. Labor forces in a lot of countries are not as profound as we once thought they were, especially a lot of the changes. And that leads us to kind of this second point, and that is we have a tendency as multinational corporations in particular to have what we would call an ethnocentric view when we talk about labor markets. And what that means is that when in the country that you're in, if you're in the US or if you're in the developed nations, you have a tendency to think, well, everybody kind of looks like we do when it comes to their labor pools. So you have this, this concept of, well, I'm sure that they've got a lot of people who know how to do cloud computing, and I'm sure they have a lot of people who have this capability or that capability. But the reality is every country is very, very different. And there's a significant difference in the skill capability and ability amongst the various countries themselves. In some countries, it's very, very difficult to get an engineering degree. In others, it's actually not that difficult. And the level and quality that you get is very, very different. And I have these kind of key points down below, and that is we have another very false understanding of how big countries are. So I always kind of put this in here. Is it bigger than Ohio? So in the first point, Ohio actually the state of Ohio produces more global GDP than Poland, Singapore, Malaysia, the Philippines, and many, many other countries, Sweden and Belgium. That's just a thing of understanding like, well, hey, we want to put operations in Singapore. Hey, we want to put them in Poland. Well, understand that these countries are not even of the production capability that we see in a state, just a Midwestern state like Ohio. Another point is, India is a very massive population and they have done incredible wonders for IT outsourcing, but it's still important to know that 44% of all workers in India are in agriculture versus 1.3% in like Germany. And then in the US, it's about 10%. So it's just understanding that these countries are made of very different things. And the last thing I want to say is also a very dated way of looking at the world is to say, countries like Mexico and Malaysia and the Philippines, people used to look at those things and go, boy, they're not like the US. We're very technical. We have really low unemployment. Well, they actually have lower unemployment rates than we do. So that's something in Mexico's case, way lower than the US. So as you start to think about, well, I'm going to go do this, I'm going to go do that, don't just think that these countries are sitting there going, oh, please give us your jobs. We can't wait to take your jobs because we have so many available workers. It's just simply not the case. So what we've seen happening in the past couple of years in particular, people going, well, we've exhausted this country and we've exhausted this country, or that country's starting to get expensive now. Or you get countries that you've outsourced things to, and then they start offshoring it as well because they don't have the capacity. So a lot of these people, a lot of the companies now are going, well, I guess we're going to end up in Africa. But you can see that is an area that, of course, is growing. But when you get down to it, we get back to this conversation of yes, but. And if you look at the technology capability, so if you look at both the workforce, the sophistication of the workforce, and are the populations kind of growing, we kind of can divide these countries, or I'm sorry, these regions into various buckets. And where we really want to be careful of is all of those ones that show up towards the top. That means that these labor forces are the ones that are most able to handle your technology needs, your growing, the evolving landscape of technology and where we're trying to take work. These are the areas that are best able to handle that. Well, guess what? That's where you already are. And these are the areas that are already starting to go through population declines or incredibly tight labor forces as we go through the next 10 years. When you go to the bottom of this, you start to see these lower opportunity ones. They have a population, but they do not have any of the technology infrastructure that's going to require so much investment just to get them up to a certain capability. So this presents all kinds of problems. Well, where can I go in the globe who actually has an educated workforce, who actually has the technology infrastructure to take the work that we want to do? So basically, for the end of my section here is, in order to be competitive, in order to deal with this global market, you have to know as much as you possibly can about all of the countries. You need to know, if you have a labor force there now, you need to know what that's going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years. Is it still going to be there? How expensive is that labor force going to become? And if you think, well, I want to move them, then where else are you going to move these people to? So with that, I will now transition over. Who is coming after me? I actually remember.
Thank you, Ron. Love the setup there, and yeah, glad that we went kind of that high level, broad trends down to what is actually happening in the macro economy. I would love Meta, from your perspective, if you could talk about your role a little bit, and then kind of some of the journey that you're going through as we expand on kind of diving in from a practitioner perspective from what Ron just mentioned.
Sure. Great. Meta McKinney. I've been with NVIDIA for just under 2 years, so I still feel quite new because in the midst of all of that, there was the great tech pause, and so we went through a pretty big shift in hiring soon after I started. I was brought on to head up the talent intelligence function to start it. We did not have one prior or anyone focused there. I came from med tech, med device, and insurance industry prior, both in talent intelligence functions. So I've been in the space for a little bit longer, I think, than some. But and then in the last 6 months, I've been leading the talent attraction function, which talent intelligence sits under. But so we've got recruitment marketing, social branding, talent branding, and events. And with the intent that all the data is driving kind of the work that we're doing within the attraction strategy.
That's wonderful.
Down to me.
So as you've dove into your role, being relatively new, but obviously setting out the new priorities for the coming year, I'm curious if you can talk through kind of your broad global plans and how you're setting up that plan.
Yeah, so we definitely have a global strategy and workforce with huge growth plans up in the next year. Lots of hiring to do. We're on the opposite of where we were about a year ago. From pause, now we're like full steam ahead. So we have probably about a 50-50 US, non-US approach, as well as about a 50-50 kind of tech, from a tech focused between hardware and software. But are primarily hiring, we're 80% tech roles, the hardest to fill, I feel like. And so that need for data and insights is critical.
And as you talk with your leaders, kind of what are some of their needs that they're focused on for what information they need from your team?
It really, so I think kind of multifold. twofold is really understanding what is the global scope and how are things shifting and changing. The tech, the skills are changing so rapidly, and we're on kind of that cutting edge. So where are the locations? Where are things shifting and changing? What are we seeing in the competitive market? And how do we respond to that? So global location and location analysis is super important, but also really understanding, I think, what Ron talked about, those differences in global locations, and how do we really understand what those differences are, and how do we attract the talent that we're trying to attract. So really using the data to understand the nuances around skills and around people and around locations, and things like, what does a commute look like, and where are our competitors sitting, and where might there be opportunities. So understanding the persona and really building strategies around understanding the nuances of regional, locational, and also the talent itself that sits there.
So obviously you're looking at a bunch of internal data. Where have you had to kind of lean on outside partners to fill in that data strategy that you're working with?
Yeah, I think where the power really comes into play is being able to understand what are we seeing internally, and understanding the problems or issues or the things that we're trying to solve, and then how does that look when we pull in the external data, and it's really marrying those two. But I think the ability to bring in the government data as well as the profile and postings data is really critical around that. And then understanding, again, from our internal standpoint and lens, like how does that all blend and look?
And I know NVIDIA has been in the news a lot lately, so I know your brand is, probably at an all-time high. How has that affected the amount of attraction that you're seeing coming to, candidates to your career website? And what are some of the things that you've had to deal with, just that volume?
Yeah, we've been super lucky, or strategic in that, and we have definitely seen our application rate skyrocket in the last 6 months. It's pretty astounding. And so the shift then becomes, how do we deal with that volume, and how do we get to the quality within that? And I think thinking about things like the skills taxonomy, and how does that relate to our job descriptions, and how do we best put that into job descriptions, but then also how do we then connect with the talent that we're trying to connect with in a meaningful way? How do we speak what's important to them? Again, kind of going back to that, how do we understand the nuances of particular roles and functions that are critical to our success, and then put that into everything that we're doing, so that we are reaching the talent that we need, and getting that quality of hire. So I think work around, how do we understand what competitors are calling and doing, how are they shifting, how are we looking, and what are we getting, really analyzing the applicants that we're getting and trying to understand what it is that's working and what's not, and how to shift and pivot accordingly.
That's great, Meta. Appreciate all those insights. We'll probably come back in a little bit here, but I think bridging off that skill taxonomy, I think would be a great time to transition over to Brandon, to kind of go a little bit deeper into some of those insights for not only skills taxonomy, but some of our other supporting data that we're looking at globally.
Thanks, Mark. So yeah, I think we've all been talking global here, and it comes down to what kind of new data are we talking about from Lightcast? So what we did is we listened to practitioners like yourselves, and what we heard is that you need insight into more countries, you need more detailed data for those countries, and probably most importantly, you need consistent data across countries, especially for many of you who operate in businesses that are primarily do business or are located in the United States, the UK, and Canada, and you're trying to see you're trying to have that global opinion, and you need the ability to look at a job in the United States or a place where you're used to working in, and then compare it apples to apples to another location in a place you're less familiar with. And so we looked at those needs and we looked at our skills, something that we'll talk about. As a company, we looked at what are we good at? What kind of skills do we have that we can leverage? And we looked at the modeling and the work that we've done in the United States, and we thought we can apply that globally. We also have taxonomies that can help to really clarify the story internationally, especially when it comes to skills and occupations. And so we set about how to use those skills in order to address those needs. And what it ended up with is basically three things. So we can do what we call the Lightcast occupation taxonomy, which gives us internationally the ability to look at, or I should say globally, the ability to look at not just 33 categories of labor, which is what we had previously operated from, or around 500 categories of labor, which is the current standard internationally through ISCO, but to bump that up to 1,500 to 2,000 categories of labor, to slice an economy very narrowly so you can look in and see very particular jobs, not just software developers, but Java developers or people with very particular skills. And so we applied that Lightcast occupation taxonomy, or LOT, using large language models to our postings and profiles data that we had for 20 countries, with plans to expand that to an additional 30 by the end of the year. So what that allows us to do is to look at these 20 countries, to dig into about 1,300 metropolitan areas and look at very specific jobs, is what we wanted you to be able to do, and get the insight that you expect to get from postings and profiles, just like you would in the United States. The other big benefit to the LOT is that when you start thinking about hiring internationally, you have to start wondering, if I put in a job title in France and then in Brazil, am I getting the same people? Am I getting all of the people that I want? Do they call them the same thing there? Or maybe the job title I entered actually applies to a bunch of jobs I don't actually care about. And the LOT gets rid of all of that uncertainty. When we did the mapping, we looked at job titles as a key input there. We also went deeper into the postings and profiles to figure out what skills are being talked about here. So we know that the job title and the skills together can help us align that posting or profile to the right occupation. So that you just have to punch in software developer, and you know you're getting only software developers and not a bunch of things you aren't really concerned about. And you're getting all of them, and you're not missing out on a big chunk because there's some local knowledge you may be missing. So based on skills and titles, you're getting the right people. The other thing that we did is we looked at profile data, and we recognized most of us use profiles to try to estimate the size of a workforce. And knowing that there's problems with that because maybe particular jobs don't have profiles, or maybe profiles data isn't great in a particular location, a lot of us will then go to the government data, LMI, which may be not very granular. It may be at a very high level if it's there at all. And so we used our modeling to come up with what we call a workforce estimate, which allows us to use what we know about countries that have very rich data and apply ratios to countries that have less rich data to come up with an estimate that tells us how big the actual workforce is. Once you pair that with profiles, you can know the characteristics of a workforce from the profiles, and you know the rough size of the workforce in a confident way based on our workforce estimates. So those are the things that we added: is LOT profiles, LOT postings translated from 8 languages in addition to English, and workforce estimates. And what we can do with those things is what I'm really excited to talk about with Christine here. So things like analyzing workforces, comparing locations apples to apples from the United States all the way through to locations in Germany, India, and Brazil, and many others. We want you to understand your competition at a very granular level, not just figuring out what are they paying software developers, what are they paying Java developers in Berlin, based on what these companies are saying in their public postings. And then finally, we want to help with your skills initiatives. We can look at the skills that are being posted for and the skills that are being bragged about in people's profiles, and you can go in and see what the workforce actually looks like and what their characteristics are like. So we're heading deeper into this. This is all what you might do, and what I'm excited to do with Christine is talk about what actually you do with the data and what a real practitioner does with insight like this to help do their job. So I'll pass it over to Christine. And Christine, we kind of rushed over your background, and I want to give you a second here to kind of tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into the full meat of our discussion here.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Christine, and I've been part of the talent intelligence team at Google for about 5 years now. Prior to that, my background is in compensation consulting, pay equity, analytics, workforce planning, and talent strategy. So, Meta gave such a great overview of what talent intelligence looks and feels like. And the way I also like to describe the role is functioning a bit like an in-house HR consulting team and labor market researcher that really studies the external job market and translates what's happening into implications for talent strategy that HR business leaders can use for recruiting use cases, for workforce planning, and for things like location strategies. So those elements are very much a big core of what talent intelligence focuses on over here. I do also want to call out that if you are an HR practitioner on this call and your title is not talent intelligence, and maybe your org doesn't have a dedicated team or you're not familiar with the concept, then I want to emphasize that maybe this section is perhaps even more interesting to help demonstrate that any HR practitioner can access and find value in applying talent intelligence, agnostic of the HR domain you're in. Fundamentally, talent intelligence is about connecting what's happening in the external labor market to different elements of talent strategy, whether you're in talent acquisition, learning and development, compensation, an HR business partner, or et cetera. So hopefully these use cases might inspire ideas for how your team may further explore how to harness this data. So Brandon and I are going to talk through 3 different types of use cases that might be relevant. The first is evolving roles. The second is roles that are highly competitive, where we're intensely reacting to the competition for talent, as Meta and Josh kind of set the picture for. And the third is workforce strategy. Now, the first one, evolving roles. We know that job roles evolve over time, and we've heard a lot that artificial intelligence is one of those things that's primed to speed up the frequency, perhaps, and the pace and the volume at which roles are going to change. They're going to create new jobs, maybe change dramatic components of existing ones. So this has a lot of downstream implications that are practical for all of us in HR as new jobs emerge or existing ones evolve. Specific examples, compensation teams need really clear job definitions to differentiate pay premiums on emerging in-demand skills, or design teams need clear role definitions, and recruiting really needs adaptable hiring rubrics for how we effectively screen and precisely identify the talent we're looking for. So the question I think about is, as HR practitioners, what can we sort of do tactically when jobs are evolving and there maybe aren't standardized job role definitions that are evolving fast enough to meet our needs? You heard the prior speakers talk a lot about skills taxonomies and why they're useful, and I'm really here to just double down on that message. I think there's 2 things to think about. The first is that it's really, really helpful to default to speaking about talent in terms of skills, not just job title, and to drive fluency in this language of skills across the business, because skills is just frankly a much more dynamically evolving language to talk about talent than job titles are. The second point I would raise is using a skills library is a really excellent resource to let us actually flexibly define and redefine roles as they're evolving and more precisely identify the talent we're looking for. I think of skills as like individual ingredients and a job title as maybe the way a company chooses to name a dish or a particular combination of ingredients. I think Meta or said this earlier, or someone else said this earlier, how a job title, what it means can vary company by company or even culture by culture. So the more precise and standardized and dynamic way to identify exactly what our talent needs are is at the skills level. And then put another way, I'll talk a little bit around a few hypothetical examples and then have Brandon show us what that might look like. I would say having an internal skills taxonomy, which is, a library of the skills that exist inside our organization, is great, fantastic. Having also an external skills taxonomy, which is awareness of the skills emerging in the job market, is even better, because that lets us update and expand and compare our skills to identify gaps between the skills we have inside the organization and how we've identified them, and the evolving skills that are now being required or showing up in core roles, or even new roles that are popping up in the market. So a couple of tactical illustrations for why this is valuable to even think about. If a certain skill is emerging within a core role in your organization, learning and development could then identify that emerging skill and focus on upskilling and building that capability to help the entire organization keep pace with the evolution. If your job role is evolving significantly, or you're hiring for a new role that doesn't really have existing definitions, being able to articulate that information at the skills level of detail helps talent acquisition quickly adapt and more precisely identify the right talent in a skills-based hiring sort of environment. And then the last one I'll give is, maybe there's an emerging skill within a core role that we really do need to know about, that internal mobility needs to know about, because we can use that language to identify fungible internal talent that has the skill that's emerging, but simply today operates and lives under a different job title than we might think of as an obvious place to look inside our company. So to summarize, as Brandon shows a couple examples, using a skills library really lets you more flexibly and precisely identify the talent that we're curious about internally and externally.
Yeah, and this is what a skills library might look like. So this is from Lightcast. This is how we would break down something like design, and you can see how we can bucket those things into a way that you can organize those ingredients into a job to figure out what actually do you need, what do people have, what are the gaps, all those pieces that are helpful to understanding the ingredients that go into putting together a role that may not exist yet. Though design is I think fairly well understood, but there's a lot of newer areas like artificial intelligence. So we could look at something like artificial intelligence. And when we got talking, Christine and I, we trying to figure out ways to kind of demonstrate this idea. And what I did is I dug into our data and looked back to Ireland at artificial intelligence as just that skill, not looking at any occupation in particular. What were employers in Ireland looking for when they looked for artificial intelligence skills in 2019? And you can see these are very technical jobs. And what's really interesting is if you bump forward to 2023, a 12-month period, you can see that the number one job wasn't even on that. We say insufficient data because there wasn't any data. No one was looking for writers with AI skills previously. So you can see that the roles are evolving based on new technologies, and their skills are going to be more indicative of the things that these people can do than their job title might indicate.
Yeah, that's a great point. If we know writers and what the core components are in terms of evolving skills, that impacts maybe how we think about the job descriptions, the performance evaluation criteria, a lot of downstream implications. The second use case I want to talk about is competing for talent. So, Josh had discussed labor shortages. Ron's research has told us that working age populations are going to grow more slowly in most markets. And you heard from Meta about just the vital importance of really being prepared to compete for talent. So again, I'm here to double down on that message. I think the real takeaway is the traditional build versus buy talent conversation or considerations will necessarily have to evolve in the coming years, right? So it's really important for us to be prepared to think about intensified competition for external talent, but also to think about intensified competition to retain and keep engaging our existing talent. So to just bucket that a little bit, I'm going to first talk about talent acquisition. I think, understanding external hiring demand, access to data about who is hiring for the roles and skills we care about, in what volumes, at what comparable pay levels, in what locations. Knowing those kinds of things really enables HR teams like talent acquisition, like compensation, to identify our relevant competitors and to tailor the employee value proposition pitch in response to that to be competitive. And this sort of alludes back to the first point that was on one of Josh's slides about employees being a little bit more articulate about what they care for and what they want and how they make decisions. And then Meta's point about having to understand the persona of the talent we're competing for. So knowing precisely the level of hiring competition we are up against helps us also set clearer expectations with the business about the rate and the pace at which we expect to hire, like knowing the intensity of competition externally. I'm going to flip gears now and talk about the retentive piece that I alluded to earlier. One thing I think quite a lot about and talk about with my team is the value of thinking about retention-focused applications of this same kind of data, because the employee value proposition is not just external facing, it's internal facing too, right? And we're not in an infinite buy talent sort of era, according to all the research we've heard about. So, retention also means that we pay attention to adapting continuously how our EVP is competitive relative to external demand, especially if we anticipate tightened labor pools globally. So one idea is like using hiring demand data to pinpoint which roles are really highly being competed for, to monitor for potential attrition risk, that helps us more proactively prepare to deploy retentive strategies for monitoring or engaging certain populations if we are getting earlier signals of intensifying competition or things like skyrocketing pay. And Brandon has pulled up a couple of really great examples to illustrate what this kind of data can look like.
Yeah, I really like that idea of we're trying to look for signals. We want to monitor the risks to our workforce for the retention on it. And so here, if we look at warehouse workers, which is something that can, an occupation that can migrate very easily to a new occupation or for a new company, if we look at them in a place like Poland, we can see that the postings trend has remained fairly stable over time. So, with a fairly stable increase, if anything. But what if there were a spike? This is something we can monitor. We can keep an idea of what kind of actions do we need to make. Should we be nervous about this slow increase over the course of the past year? Does that tell us what we need to do in order to make sure that we retain them? Say that we are concerned about retaining them. We want to see who's hiring them. Who's going about competing with us for talent. So here we can break down staffing companies and non-staffing companies in the mix and see who do we need to be worried about? What can we learn about these companies that help us to understand, well, if we're worried about Amazon moving into this space, we think they're the reason why the occupations, the postings is going up. We can dig into that, we can validate that, and we can also figure out something about the wages. What kind of posted salaries is Amazon putting out there? And how do we want to respond? Or any other company that might be moving in. From a less retentive point of view, if you're looking for just pure talent acquisition, you can look here and see, well, I probably need to be using a staffing company. That's probably how the people here are going to expect to learn about the postings, the opportunities that I have available for them. This is a place where it can kind of help you figure out, well, maybe we do need to be using that versus maybe it's better to find another route. And then finally, we can look at, if I can operate my computer here, we can look at things like the pay. What kind of pay is occurring in the advertised wages, which is really valuable. It's what the competition is saying about a particular role, what they're telling the public about what this role could do, what they're trying to do to incentivize people to come and work for them. So here we're looking at all of Poland. We're looking at all possible job postings related to this labor or warehouse worker, but we could dig into particular employers and figure out the things that they're offering about that, and what you want to do in response to that is going to change based on what companies you see and what your goals are.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a lot of value in having this information in real time to think about how to prepare the overall HR ecosystem to respond and think about proactive strategies. The third use case we're going to talk about is what we called workforce strategy. That phrase is, workforce strategy is a very multifaceted topic. So we're just going to talk about one facet today, which is about having a global resource planning mindset, something that Ron talked about earlier, which really resonates. And I've seen it evolve dramatically quite a lot over the last few years. As companies evolve their decisions about their geographic growth strategies, that can look very, very different and, manifest in a lot of different ways. For some companies, it might be about a decision on in-person versus remote versus hybrid. And for others, maybe multinational companies, it's about looking a little bit more broadly, expansion within a country, within a region, perhaps looking at other regions. I think regardless of the scale, geographically you're looking at, the principle is the same. We as HR practitioners have to adapt pretty rapidly to this, and they all have implications on quite literally where we think the business should be looking for talent. So, whether you're working for an organization that's geographically clustered together in a particular place or widely distributed, I think the idea we're sort of talking about today is the value of looking broadly beyond where you currently are today in preparation for the fact that there's a global talent ecosystem we're competing against. We have an increasingly globalized labor force that we have to adjust to, and having an increasingly default global lens on these kinds of talent strategies will really prepare us to support the business. Because, quite simply, we know whatever workforce strategy we have today is not going to be the exact same one a year from now. It has to be a dynamic and to respond to whatever's happening. And so, being prepared for all possibilities by proactively having a point of view that's data-driven on wider geographic talent availability is really great. And as I do want to call something we mentioned earlier, which is being mindful of what it looks like I do want to caveat that Ron mentioned earlier. It's being mindful of ethnocentrism and having in deep partnerships with all elements of HR within as a talent intelligence partner. Really hearing from frontline HR, recruiters on the ground, locally based HR experts in a variety of disciplines, compliance, et cetera, to understand the operational realities of attracting and retaining in that market and any cultural nuances. And so I would say a great idea to think about is pairing that partnership alongside global talent supply data to have a full picture for the business. And Brandon, I'll hand it over to you.
I love that idea of, as a practitioner in this space, you need to have an opinion. You're going to be called upon to have opinions on things that you maybe need to do some digging into. But that's what you're asked to do is come in and help to inform a decision. Sometimes you're making it, sometimes you're informing it, but you need to have that opinion. And so here we have an example of, let's say their current scope is a workforce based in London. And so you can see that if they're looking for account managers, sales reps, in London, they're going to have this pool. They're going to have a pool of about, we estimate, around 90,000 people. And let's say that they're fairly comfortable here and their opinion is based solely here. But what if the company expands? What if the company says, you know what, we're going to go to a hybrid model where you need to be in the office once a month. You need to come in for at least 3 days a month. Well, that expands the view there. And if you had a global perspective here, a global opinion, you would have this kind of data in mind. You'd be able to look and say, well, there's a lot of countries that you could live in, a lot of places in the United Kingdom you could live in, a lot of places bordering the United Kingdom where you could get to the office once a month, 3 times a month. And so the workforce expands from 90,000 to hundreds of thousands potentially. And the skills, the pay ranges, those things all get more diverse while you're at it. And so you can do something like this to help you gain that global opinion. Even if your purview has previously been fairly limited, it's not difficult now to come in and get a global opinion on a particular topic that you're going to want to be able to respond to should your company evolve to something that is more expansive in terms of regions. So these are just 3 of the really relevant buckets of places you could be thinking about how to use global insight given the economies and the structure of the way the world works now. So really grateful for Christine and her insight here. Super insightful on, for me as someone who deals with the data all the time, to be able to see how this is actually applied is fascinating. So I'm going to kick things back over to Mark, or unless I guess I'll give Christine a minute here if she wants to wrap up, and if not, we'll pass over to Mark to move us into the next section. Any final comments, Christine?
Thanks so much. And by the way, if you don't mind riding that Eurostar train between London and Paris, it's another great option. And that example you showed, I think the ending sentence here is, there's a lot of value to just defaulting to a global lens and being very cognizant of long-term factors as HR practitioners, and talent intelligence and being tuned into what's happening externally. That's sort of like a connective tissue, not only to what's happening and what to prepare the business for, but that intelligence can be a connective tissue across HR to make sure that there's alignment and coordination between different HR functions, and we're using the intelligence in a cohesive way.
That's so great. Christine, thank you for your insights, and Brandon for walking through some of those examples. Obviously, these are key areas. Josh, you're talking to hundreds of companies every single week. What are your thoughts on kind of these key trends that you're seeing from Google? I'd love to get your 2 cents.
Well, I want to make sort of 2 observations. While we were online, I did a search on how many talent intelligence jobs there are. There are 1,800 talent intelligence positions. Last year, when I looked, there were about 400. So more and more people are realizing they have to do this. But it isn't just about sourcing and recruiting, as Christine said. It's also about understanding the skills in your company. So let me kind of talk about this idea of the skills taxonomy. If you start working on a skills taxonomy, which I know a lot of companies are, and you pull the data in from Lightcast, you're going to end up having a lot of conversations with a lot of senior leaders about whether they agree or not. And they don't know. I mean, most non-HR sort of business leaders, they don't know all the skills that are going on all over the world in their domain. They don't know what they don't know. I'll give you one very specific example. So I won't mention the name of the company, but there's an oil and gas company, a very large one, that has decided very explicitly to get into new forms of hydrocarbons, batteries, mining, electric, solar energy, and so forth. So they took their existing HRMS job description, job title data, and they created some new job titles for energy engineer. They don't even know what it means. They just wrote it down and they went out to search, and they couldn't find anyone that would apply to those jobs because they didn't understand the actual skills they needed. So working with the operating units, the HR people went through and figured out skill by skill, here's the stuff we need to ask for. All of a sudden, their sourcing got way smarter. They could find people that had those skills, and now they're building the job taxonomy around these new forms. This is going on in every company, in every domain. I just can't, thank you guys enough at Lightcast and both of you, on this webinar for talking about this, because this is a very, very important new domain where HR can really help the company transform itself rapidly into whatever direction they're trying to go. And it isn't just about hiring more people. One more thing I'll just say, and I think Ron brought this up in his talk. If you think you know the person you need and you think you have the job title of that person, you might be completely wrong. And so you might actually hire the wrong person if you don't do this kind of work. So I just can't reinforce how important and strategic this kind of effort is.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. That's wonderful. Meta, I wanted to bring it back to you and say, as you heard Christine go through this, obviously she reiterated some of the things, but didn't know if you had any comments, particularly maybe around the competing for talent section that you wanted to reiterate.
No, I just was thinking as Josh was talking about how do we help the business and our hiring managers understand that, and like the laundry list of skills and things that goes into a job description, and how do we really narrow and focus on what we need, and then do that competitive intel around what is it known as. So just resonates for sure.
I love it. Yeah, I get the pleasure of talking about skills every single day with our customers and prospects, and there is still confusion around what is skills. So, like, what do we do with them? How do I put those into practice? And trying to simplify that and bring something to the table with an existing, open taxonomy, it really helps kind of set the stage for those conversations. And then, Christine, I loved your example about the recipe and using that as ingredients to name that dish. That's really what it comes down to. As we're seeing all of these jobs evolve so fast, we need to get to those ingredients and understand not only where are they, internally and how are we structuring it, but outside, what is that trend? So that external labor market context is really, really helpful to.
Mark, can I interrupt and add another thought? So these three scenarios that you guys have are great, but there's another one that I'm curious, we guys might want to talk about, and that is what I call the underperforming team. So there's some group in the company that's behind on their numbers, poor quality. You can be Boeing talking about the 737 MAX, whatever it is. There's some group of the company that everybody says is messed up, and they agree they're messed up and they don't know why. That is the opportunity to go in and look at the skills of the high performers, identify what skills are making a difference, and do a better job of sourcing and assessing and developing those skills. A lot of managers don't know how to do that. They've never done that before. And so those of you with talent intelligence data can do that kind of work. I'm just curious if you guys see that as a big scenario, because I see it all the time.
Yeah, Christine, I would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating example. And one of the things that I was reminded of as you brought that example up is, again, the far reaching implication of using skills language consistently in the HR ecosystem. So, in a situation like that where maybe performance is an issue, it's not only just about ensuring, the language and resources that talent acquisition has are very specific, but also about maybe going back and looking at performance expectation language around competency library definitions, around how we do performance reviews and upskilling and learning and dev, and making sure that those are all adapting to pinpoint to the diagnosed skills that are, maybe contributing to this performance issue.
Meta, any comments from your side?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we keep hearing it, and I think it's very true. The importance of the soft skill piece and the management and leadership, and how do we how do we bring that in, from a very tech focused company? How do we influence within talent intelligence the importance of the soft skill and the management leadership skills within that as well?
I love it. Well, wonderful. Thank you, team. We're going to move into Q&A. And if you don't see the spot where to put in questions in the Vimeo app here, click the logo at the bottom of the player, and that'll bring up a different window. So now's the time to add in some questions, but I'll take a few here from here. So this one is going to go to you, Ron. Can you expand on how you're thinking about certain countries in terms of which ones we should be focusing on in terms of the global trends? Like where is the best source for us to get some of that specific country data that you've been looking at globally?
Well, I mean, obviously, point of a lot of this call is that we are doing everything we can to provide all these pieces of data. As far as if you're ever just curious about something, let's say you just want to do a quick cursory glance about countries and their capabilities. There's a website called tradingeconomics.com, and really what it does just has all of the countries just kind of listed, and it'll show like GDP per capita, things like that are incredibly valuable. What you can do in just looking at something like GDP per capita, you can see a country may have a lot of people, but are those people producing things of great value? And I would use this as an example, and I'm going to just diverge a little bit from this question to say this because I think it's a really important part. When you start to look at population models going forward, many countries have already started to make their transition. The US will make theirs by 2050, 2060, and we'll start heading downward as well. So when people talk about the global population expanding, a lot of times they'll point to things like South Sudan or things like that. When you look at global GDP, you have to understand those areas that are looking at population increases produce about 0.1 to 0.2% of all global GDP. So if you get population increases in countries that aren't producing things of global product or anything like that, they're really just producing what they need to live on for that day, then you're not getting a contribution. And so that's what I mean about it's a holistic thing. About it starts with, I believe our labor data is the key to first thing. So you go in and you go, is there a worker population there? And now let's start to learn more about it. Let's learn a little bit more about the not only the country, but the parts of that country that would be maybe you're not allowed to take profits out of that country, or maybe the worker costs in that country are absolutely extraordinary, like the benefits costs in Brazil are 100 times. I'm sorry, it's exactly, if you're going to pay somebody $20 an hour, you're also going to pay them another $20 an hour in benefits costs. Oh, and by the way, if they get let go, you're going to put them on unemployment for a minimum of a year. There's a lot of countries like that. But you have to first know the labor force is there, worth engaging, and then you can kind of take all of those other things, which should also be a critical part of the discussion, and add those as well.
Oh, that's awesome, Ron. Thank you. Josh, this one is for you. It's from Alec. Big fan. He's a JBA member. So that's always good to find another fan here. He says, if you're trying to kickstart your career in this field, how would you map or approach this in today's world? So think about that.
Yeah, I think this is a really important thing because this domain is growing so fast. So I think Christine and Meta, I think you guys come from maybe talent acquisition, perhaps, or data and people analytics. I think there's 2 or 3 sources of skills here. One is you got to be more like Ron. I think most people in HR have to think like economists. I've found myself turning into an armchair economist almost every day now. Get to know what's going on in the labor market and the economy. The second is you have to understand recruiting and sourcing and all of the complexities of that. I mean, it isn't enough to say there's a whole bunch of people in this country, let's go get them. It's much more complicated than that. But the third is I think you have to have either a team or some experience in the integrated talent management process inside of your company. Because for every challenge you have in the external labor market, you may be able to solve it in the internal part of your company too, because your company is a labor market. And if you think about your company as a little economy of people moving around up and down in their jobs, you need to understand that also, especially if you work for a really big company. And then, of course, you need to understand and be interested in data. So we do a lot of work on development of HR professionals, and I think most HR people are very capable of doing this kind of work, but you've got to sort of tiptoe across into these other domains and get to know them better and better. And I think talent intelligence is one of the most fascinating, important parts of business, to be honest. And I'm excited to see more people jumping into this.
Awesome. Thank you, Josh. This next one is for Christine and Meta. It says, what specific type of AI skills should non-technical people, i.e. non-software engineers, what should we be learning? So coming from two powerhouse AI companies in NVIDIA and Google, Christine, maybe you can kick it off, but yeah, curious if you've talked around AI skills for non-technical folk.
Well, this is a question that it's, I think, difficult to answer simply, but I think right now there's a lot of ongoing exploration around how to optimize and leverage AI technologies just for productivity and workflow. And so, on a practical individual level, I would think about how to understand the things that AI can and cannot do for your role. For example, it can optimize certain pieces of your decision making in your process in recruiting, but it definitely should not be making any decisions, right? Um, and then on a broader org and strategic level, thinking about how AI's impact on productivity might impact workforce planning and talent needs mapping for the future. And so I think depending on what angle you're coming at as a practitioner, as an individual, thinking about how to integrate it into the everyday versus how to advise on its impact to the business overall, it could look very, very different, but definitely an evolving answer, I would say.
Anything to add, Meta?
Well said. I totally agree with that take. I think it's interesting in just some of the work that I've done, some prototyping in work is how do I partner with those experts and bring the business scope of it too. So again, I think there's the balance of understanding what the business needs are and how to utilize this new technology and really bring something that's robust and meaningful. So even though I don't have the AI expert skills, how do I partner with and accomplish what I need to accomplish?
Or can I make a comment on AI?
Please do.
So we're doing a lot of AI stuff with HR people directly using a platform that we have. You don't have to know how to build AI to use AI. So I think if you're intimidated by like what is a large language model and what is a neural network, you don't really need to know that. You need to get comfortable with using it because it does so many things for you that are not obvious. That's the world we're going to be living in. You don't know how to build Excel. You need to know how to use Excel.
Exactly. I love it.
Totally.
And this question is for Christine. This is what are some of the ways that you measure the impact of your talent intelligence team and the advisory services that you bring to the business?
This is so timely. I was talking about this with my manager, Svetlana, yesterday. There are lots of different ways to do this. I think for us, what we think about is how usable and helpful and actionable is the insight to the business. And so there has to be some level of buy-in and demonstration of the insights being used to inform location strategy conversations, being used to advise on whether to do or not do a certain refinement to the way we hire and engage in the market. And so I think one of the measures that we care quite a lot about is how embedded we are in the business and the level of engagement we have from them, as literal as how many questions we get, but also understanding if what we're using and pushing out is applied. Because if it's not, then it's such at an abstract level that it's simply not actionable for HR. And we need to evolve to understand a little bit the specific use cases and be creative around what this tactically means for the business or the HR practitioner going forward. So adoption, I would say, and influence and information.
It's wonderful. Well, thank you. I think it was the perfect last question. We had a few more in the chat. We will record those and make sure that we get some answers out. We had a wonderful DEI question out there for Ron, so we will hook up a response there and make sure that we follow up on that. But I just want to reiterate to thank everyone for being here and joining us for this wonderful presentation. Thank you to all of our wonderful guests on this webinar today. Appreciate all of your insights and all of your partnership to make us better at Lightcast and to bring some of this wonderful knowledge to the world. So thank you again to everybody, and look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thanks.